كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So in this section now, we will be going through the next part of the poem of Ibn Abidin, where he then discusses as to what will happen if there is no transmission regarding a particular ruling or particular mas'ala that's come up. So in this case that's come up in front of us, there's no ruling found from our imams of the school. So what happens then? What do we do? So he goes on to mention step by step what to do. So the first thing that we will be doing is going to the what the later scholars have mentioned, and how do we go about looking at what the later scholars have mentioned. He will detail this. Then what if the later scholars don't have any consensus, they're all differing views, what to do then? And lastly, what if the later scholars don't mention anything as well? What do we then do? So these stages he will mention regarding, and he will detail this. In amongst this, obviously, he gives us the importance of making sure that if we are giving a ruling upon which nobody has mentioned something about, and it's a new ruling, a new mas'ala, and we're giving a ruling there, then we have to be very careful. He gives us an understanding there of making sure that a person, if you don't know, then don't be shy to say la adri. Don't be shy to say I don't know the ruling, or to say something along those lines. Say something like, I'll check this. Let me check this properly, and I'll get back to you. Something along these lines. So he obviously tells us regarding this in quite a bit, and then inshallah we will elaborate on this further as well, inshallah, using the Usulul Ifta of Mufti Taqi Uthmani as well, to make us understand what is it and how our predecessors dealt with these kind of rulings. Then lastly, he will mention, is it even permissible for somebody who hasn't reached a particular ranking in as a mufti, even if they're labeled a mufti, even if they have the title mufti, are they allowed to issue a ruling for which they have no textual based evidence? So this is what he covers in this section. So we'll go through this in detail, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now we move on to the next part of Ibn Abidin's poem, where he discusses ثم إذا لم توجد الرواية عن علمائنا ذوي الدراية. Then when there is not found any transmission from our scholars, the ones who derived the rulings from the original sources, so our imams in essence, there is no transmission found from them in regard to a particular ruling. واختلف الذين قد تأخروا يرجح الذي عليه الأكثر. And the ones that came later, meaning the scholars who came later, they differed, then preponderated will be that which the majority are upon. So whatever the majority of the later scholars, they went in accordance to, that is what will be preponderated here. مثل, like who? Which scholars are we talking about? So he says مثل الطحاوي وأبي الحفص الكبير وأبوي جعفر والليث الشهير. The likes of Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, rahimahullah. He is a very, obviously, he's the famous Imam Tahawi, death date 321. He's the one that many people would have already studied the Aqidah Tahawiyah of. Likewise, the Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar of Imam Tahawi, rahmatullahi alayhi, famous in amongst our Hanafi school. I don't think he needs much of an introduction. Next, he mentions the likes of Abu Hafs al-Kabir. Abu Hafs al-Kabir, his name is Abu Ahmad bin Hafs. Ahmad bin Hafs, Abu Hafs al-Kabir in essence. So Abu Hafs is his title, his kunya in essence, and his name was Ahmad bin Hafs. He was a student of Imam Muhammad rahimahullah. So he was very early. His death date is 217. He even met Imam Abu Yusuf rahmatullahi alayhi and also Imam Malik rahimahullah. Just to understand the caliber of his caliber in terms of our school, to understand it, we go to one quote of Imam Muhammad rahimahullah in regards to him, who says that nobody has memorized or taken the books in a more correct way than Abu Hafs. Abu Hafs has taken it in a most correct way from all of my students, in essence. So you can understand Imam Muhammad praised him a lot here. So this is Abu Hafs al-Kabir. Then we have Abu Ja'far, meaning Abu Ja'far al-Hindwani. So this is Muhammad bin Abdullah al-Hindwani al-Balkhi. He is death date 362. So this is famously, he's known as Hindwani. And just to understand his caliber of knowledge, his title was Abu Hanifa as-Saghir, meaning the small Abu Hanifa. So now you can understand what kind of knowledge he would have had. And his student was the next person, Abu Layth. It says here, meaning the famous Abu Layth, meaning Abu Layth as-Samarqandi. He is very famous. His name is Nasr bin Muhammad bin Ibrahim. He is, like I said, he's the student of the former mentioned Abu Ja'far al-Hindwani. His death date is 373. So these are just examples of scholars that he mentions from whom we are taking these preponderances or opinions of. But obviously these are some in amongst the corpus of the scholars. There's many scholars there in our fiqh that we take from, the names of whom we've already mentioned, some of them previously, and as we go along, some of these names will also be mentioned. So he says, وَحَيْثُ لَمْ تُوجَدْ لِهَؤُلَاءِ مَقَالٌ وَاحْتِيجَ لِلْإِفْتَاءِ. And where it is not found for these people any opinion, and there is a need for giving a fatwa, فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْمُفْتِي بِجِدٍ وَاجْتِهَادِ وَلْيَخْشَ بَطْشَ رَبِّهِ يَوْمَ الْمَعَادِ. So the mufti should look with a lot of effort and a lot of endeavor, and whilst obviously trying to derive that ruling or trying to come to a decision of what ruling to give, he should be fearful of the seizure of his Lord on the day of return, the day when we have to return to Allah. So obviously this is important to understand the importance of when a person gives a fatwa, that a person must make sure that they are fearful of Allah, not to give a fatwa based on somebody's desires or trying to please somebody or any other reasons, which we'll discuss later further. Then to finish off this part of the poem, he says, فَلَيْسَ يَجْسُرُ عَلَى الْأَحْكَامِ سِوَى شَقِيٍّ خَاسِرِ الْمَرَامِ. And will not be bold or brave upon giving rulings besides the wretched, the one who is in loss of his endeavor. He doesn't have any wishes to wish for the future. He's in complete loss, he is. So this is the kind of a person who will just be bold and daring and just give fatwa just like that. So this is something that he has explained in this part of the poem. Then he goes into explaining each part of the poem. So first thing he says, he quotes Ibn Abidin, he quotes from Al-Hawi al-Qudsi, which is something we already discussed, just to get this, just to bring this discussion back in. So it forms to be like the introduction for our next discussion. He says that firstly, obviously we've already understood that in rulings we first take the opinion of, if there's an opinion from Imam Abu Hanifa, we go to that riwayah, that opinion, and then if there isn't, then we will be taking the opinion of Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah, and if there isn't from him, then we go to Imam Muhammad, and if there isn't from him, then we go to Imam Zufar and Imam Hassan ibn Ziyad. putting the senior students first, and in this way we take the rulings. Then he mentions, which is the main part now, that if there isn't any ruling, if there isn't a transmission found from these scholars, any of them, and the later scholars of ours, they discussed this ruling and they came to a conclusion, they took one opinion in this, then you have to take that, what the scholars were in consensus of. Then if they differed, because obviously in many of the rulings there won't be a consensus and agreement of these later scholars, but let's say they differed, then what happens? Then you take the opinion of the majority of them. Where the majority of them sided, you go with that opinion. So that's the second thing. So you can see the first thing is we go with, obviously first thing is we go with the imams, but after, if there's nothing found from the imams, we go with what the scholars, the later scholars, they all went with. Whatever they all went with, we go with that. And if there isn't something that they all went with, then we go with that which the majority of them went with. And lastly, if there is nothing found from any of these later scholars too, so they haven't discussed this matter, there's not even an ikhtilaf or anything regarding this particular matter, then what do we do? So now the mufti comes in and he's going to have to now really contemplate, really work hard to try to get to a ruling which will be which will take this mufti, which will fulfill the responsibility that this mufti has as well. Don't blindly just give a ruling, because obviously this position that the mufti has is of very, a high rank, but it also comes with a lot of responsibility. So fear Allah and keep that understanding that I have to account for what I'm going to give, what ruling I'm going to give, and don't be bold and brave to just give a ruling just like that, because that only a ignorant and wretched person will do. So this is what Hawi al-Qudsi mentions. So Ibn Abidin mentions this quote obviously because this supports what we are trying to say. Then he mentions from Khaniya. This will give us a little slight variation in terms of understanding what Khaniya is mentioning. He says that if the mas'ala is not in the Zahir al-Riwaya, it's not in the manifest transmission, then if it agrees with the principles of our Imams, then that's what we will still take. We will take that because there is no mas'ala found anywhere else. It's only found in something which is not the Zahir al-Riwaya. That's fine, we'll take that. Now, if there is no transmission found from our Imams at all, then the later scholars, they agreed upon a certain ruling, then that will be then taken. And if they differed, now the mufti who's got the ability to do ijtihad, the mufti will then do some sort of ijtihad and work out which side to go with. But if the mufti is not a mujtahid, is a muqallid, he is a follower, he is somebody who follows others, then obviously he can't then do that, right? So then he's going to have to go with the opinion of the one who is the most faqih, the most learned amongst them. And then when he does give a ruling based on that opinion, then attribute this fatwa to that person, that according to this so-and-so person, this is the ruling here. Now, he even says that if this person who is more learned, more of a faqih, is in another city, or we would say in another country even, then in them times he mentions that then you have to write to him, and don't just give a ruling without, just randomly, without contemplating, without doing this kind of research properly, because obviously that would then be forging against Allah something and making something maybe perhaps what he has made halal into haram, or that which Allah has made haram into halal. So this is very dangerous. A person should make sure they refrain from this. Now, moving on from what Ibn Abidin is still discussing, he then says that if the mufti is a muqallid, if he is not a mujtahid, then obviously this mufti will not be able to give a fatwa in regards to a ruling which he doesn't find some sort of text for. So there has to be some sort of text to be able to give a ruling, meaning he has to follow somebody. So if it's a new ruling, or if it's a ruling which he can't find any textual based evidence for, there's nothing that the scholars have actually mentioned perhaps before him, then this mufti who is a muqallid will not be able to issue a fatwa, will not be able to issue a ruling. And he is giving evidence for this from the texts of, for example, he mentions that Bahr mentioned from Tatar Khaniya, that if the scholars, the later scholars, they differ, then he will take the opinion of one of them. Obviously, we said already previously that it will be somebody, we take the opinion of who the majority are saying, what the majority are saying, or at least the opinion of the most learned amongst them, right? But he says here that take the opinion of one of them, and if he doesn't find from these later scholars, doesn't find something, then as long as he knows the different angles and the ways of doing fiqh, and he consults the people of fiqh, then he can do ijtihad, meaning he has this ability to be able to work an opinion for himself. However, this then means, Ibn Abidin says, that because he said that if he knows the ways of, the angles and the ways of working fiqh, right, this gives us evidence that if he doesn't know this, meaning if he's not a mujtahid, then in this kind of a field, but he's just read a few books perhaps, right, or he's understood a few masail, and he knows a few rulings from a few famous books and things, and which he relies upon, then he will not be allowed to give a fatwa based on his opinion. He can't give a fatwa based on his opinion. But what will be necessary for him to do? It'll be necessary for him to say here, La adri, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the ruling over here is. Or like we would say that I don't know the ruling, I will find out. Meaning that you will ask somebody who is of that caliber to be able to guide you and give you a ruling, so then you can pass on that ruling to the person who's asking you this question. So it's very important to get used to saying La adri. For a mufti, very important to get used to saying La adri, I don't know, because even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who obviously was supported through wahi, even he would say La adri in some cases, where he would stay silent. Somebody asks him a question, he doesn't know the answer, he would wait for wahi, he would wait for revelation to come down, and then only would he answer. So if we're talking like this regarding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then undoubtedly, no doubt that a scholar would be faced with those kind of occasions where you have to say La adri. And there were many occasions which we'll go through afterwards as to where the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, as well as previous scholars, they would practice upon this, and they would say where they didn't know a ruling, they would clearly say they don't know. So Ibn Abdin mentions here, and just to finish this section off, he then says that a person cannot just suffice upon finding a similitude of this ruling, something which is close to that. Maybe they think that it's a precedent, this other ruling is similar to it, because you're not safe from that the fact that between the ruling that the ruling which is, or the mas'ala which is currently in front of you, the case, should we say, that is currently in front of you, and the case that you're trying to analogize on, there is a difference between them, and you haven't really worked out the difference. You think that this ruling or this case is the same as the other case. You think that, but they're actually not the same. But obviously the person's mind doesn't get there. So he says how many rulings there are, that there is a difference between that ruling, between that and the actual one that people are trying to analogize on, people are saying is a precedent for it, such that there are books, Kitabul Furuq written. Okay, there are books like this as well, named Kitabul Furuq as well, where they differentiate between two rulings which seem similar but actually are different, and it shows why you can't use the other ruling as a precedent for this ruling, and where certain people who did do so, they went wrong. So he says that if this matter was then left to our understanding, then we will not be able to differentiate and understand the difference. So this is why he sees, quoting from Ibn Nujaym, who mentions in Fawaid al-Zayniyah that it's not permissible to give fatwa based on the qawaid, the principles and rules, general rules and general principles. You can't use that to give fatwa, because it's very important for the mufti, especially in Hanafi fiqh, right, to transmit a clear textual evidence according to what the fuqaha mentioned. And the concept of this simply is because there are so many exemptions from general principles. So there may be a general principle, but there is an exemption from that general principle, and the person doesn't know that. So they can't just use a general principle or a rule to try to issue a fatwa. So, and this is something, he says, that this is accepted in all the madhahib, because it's accepted in all the madhahib that these general rules, like as we say, are just general. The akthariya, the general, they apply generally. They don't apply wholesome in a holistic way that it applies everywhere. It doesn't apply in this way. And he quotes this from Allama Biri, mentions this as well. So a person, he says, concluding, the person that doesn't find a clear text, then they have to just refrain from answering, refrain from giving an answer, and or then ask somebody who's more knowledgeable in that area, or in any area that you can get a hold of somebody who's more knowledgeable, who will be able to guide, like he says that we've already mentioned from Khaniya. And then he quotes lastly from the Zahiriya, stating that if the person is not from the people of ijtihad, meaning is a mufti who is not able to do ijtihad, then he's not allowed to give a fatwa, except by way of just transmission. So you just say that that so and so says this, and then you will just mention what you've memorized, in essence, what you remember from the aqwal, the statements of the fuqaha. So that's something to remember. So this is what he mentions. And just to lastly here finish off this session, we wanted to understand that how the different quotes that are mentioned in relation to our predecessors, like Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi, the importance he gives, and he explains that a mufti, in essence, is like the stamp keeper, you can say. He's a muwaqqi' anillah, he says, that you are the one that is instructed, you can say, from Allah Ta'ala. You are the one that is stamping a ruling and stating, in essence, that this is what Allah Ta'ala is saying. This is what Allah Ta'ala wants from you in this Shari'a, because you are stating a Shari'i ruling. So it's very important to understand what position a mufti is in. Then there are various quotes. So, for example, Ibn al-Qayyim is also mentioning something very similar, that that the reality of somebody who is of this particular ranking, the person who's got this particular status, that he is in essence a person who he's doing tawqi' and Rabbil Ard was samawat, that he is doing the stamping on, the final stamp, you can say, on from obviously from the Lord of the heavens and the earth. And this is obviously a magnificent, noble ranking, but obviously comes along with it a lot of preparation that needs to be made, as well as a lot of understanding that needs to be a person needs to bear in mind. And likewise, there is a Allama ibn Abdul Bar mentions from Uqba ibn Muslim, rahimahullah, that he accompanied Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, for 34 months, he says. And he said that when I found him, in majority of the questions that he would be asked, he would say, La adri, I don't know. Then he turns to me, meaning Uqba ibn Muslim is saying that Ibn Umar would turn to me and say that, do you know what these people intend? He said, they intend to make our backs a bridge for them over Jahannam. It's like they're going to trample over us to get over to the other side. So in essence, he's saying that we're not the ones that are going to take this risk. You can see it's like a deep comment that he's making here. Then there are so many other quotes. For example, here, Khatib Baghdadi mentions from Bara ibn Azib radiallahu anhu that he says, I saw 300 Ahlu Badr, the 300 Sahaba. He saw 300 different Sahaba who were part of Badr. Now that was obviously the best of the cream of the cream, the best of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And there was not a single one of them except that he would prefer that his companion would suffice him in fatwa, in giving a fatwa. So they would send the questioner to somebody else, and then that person would then send to somebody else, like that. So they would send the questioner because they wouldn't want to take on that burden and responsibility that I am giving them this ruling, this fatwa. And regarding Sufyan ibn Uyayna rahmatullahi alayh, Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayh mentions regarding him that I didn't see anybody who Allah gathered all the tools of being able to give fatwa. I never saw somebody more well in this, like somebody who was complete. He had everything in him to be able to give fatwa, but he was the most silent of them when it came to giving fatwa. He was very silent. And he himself, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, mentions that the most knowledgeable people of fatwa will be the most silent of them regarding it, because they know the grave, responsibility that comes along with it. And the most ignorant one regarding fatwa is the one that speaks the most regarding this. So Bishr ibn al-Harith mentioned something similar, that the person who likes to be questioned, who likes to be asked, then he is not really entitled to be asked. Okay, this person is not somebody that should be asked. And Ata ibn Sa'ib mentions that I met many people, meaning scholars of his, that teachers and things, that would tremble when they would be asked some question and when they would be answering that question. Now, to continue with more quotes of, just to give us the understanding of how our predecessors dealt with, giving fatwa, giving ruling, because Ibn Abdin mentioned regarding this, like a person should be very fearful when giving a ruling. So, regarding Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayh, his students would mention that when Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayh would be asked a question, then it would be as though it would become as though he is standing between Jannah and Jahannam. So one wrong move, and obviously is landing me in Jahannam. That's the kind of thought process that he is going through when he is asked a question. So you can see the importance that they're giving to it. Then Imam Abu Hanifa himself is quoted to have mentioned that if it wasn't for the fear that their ilm, the knowledge will be wasted away, and people will give wrong rulings, in essence, the knowledge will be wasted, then and will go away, then I would not have given fatwa to anybody. Why? Because that person gets the benefit, and upon me is the burden. So I get the burden and they get the benefit. So how does that make sense? But obviously, because of the fear that the people won't know rulings, then he still issued rulings. Then we have a quote from Abu Sa'id Abdus Salam. He was known as Suhnun. His title was Suhnun. And he says that the worst and most wretched of people is the one who buys his akhirah, sells his akhirah for his dunya. He sells his akhirah in exchange of dunya, or in exchange of this world. And that's the most wretched person. And then he says, a person who's even more wretched than him, more wretched than this person, is the one who sells his akhirah for the dunya of somebody else. Very profound words, right? For the dunya of somebody else, meaning you're going to give somebody else some dunyawi benefit by issuing them some ruling. And because of that, you are now selling your akhirah. How foolish, how wretched is this person? So this is in essence what a person is doing when they're giving a wrong ruling, isn't it? Right? And they're not doing their job properly. Then Imam Nawawi mentions from Abdurrahman ibn Abi Layla. Yeah, he says, because he's a tabi'i, he says that I found 120 Ansar, Sahaba from Medina, who, when they were asked a question, then they would send it to another person. This person would send it to the other person like this, such that the question would come back to the original person who the question was asked to. So this is how it would go round amongst them. So this is in regards to the Sahaba radiyallahu anhu as well. And in regards to from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and also Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, they've both mentioned that the person who gives fatwa, who issues a fatwa on everything that they asked, then that person's insane. That person's majnoon. And Amir al-Sha'bi, as well as Hassan al-Basri and others, they mention that some of you people, you give fatwa in a mas'ala, meaning you give fatwa so easily. And if that kind of a ruling came upon, meaning that came to Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, he would have gathered the Ahlu Badr for it. Meaning Umar ibn Khattab was famous that whenever a ruling like this would come, he would gather the senior Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, and he would consult them, and they would come to a decision in this way. So this is a very good practice, that sometimes when there's a new ruling like this, then you consult with other people rather than giving a ruling on your own. I'm sure we get the picture here now, that there are so many quotes mentioned from all of these scholars that it quite clearly highlights how they would deal with giving fatwa. And then specifically regards saying that I don't know, and there is no embarrassment in saying I don't know. A person has to get over that. This is a thought that a person goes through, that how can I say I don't know? This person's come to me, I'm the imam, I am a scholar, I'm a teacher. How can I say I don't know? Of course you can say I don't know. You are not expected to know everything, and you should not expect yourself also to know everything. All right? So it's very easy to say I don't know. It's easier to say I don't know than it is to give an answer, right? it's always good practice to say, I'll check this, let me check this properly, and I'll get back to you. Always good to say this. So Amr ibn Abi Za'idah mentions that I did not see anyone who said when they were asked the question, La ilma li bihi, I don't have any knowledge regarding that, then Amir al-Sha'bi. Sha'bi is obviously a famous tabi'i, very, very learned, and still, despite that, he would say this. Then there are many other scholars, right, who, whenever somebody would come, Qasim bin Muhammad, for example, when he is Qasim bin Muhammad, the grandson of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when somebody would come to him, many times somebody would come to him to ask questions, and he would say, I don't know, I don't really know this very well. And he would not answer the question in this way because he wouldn't know the answer to it. There's reports of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu as well, where he would send the questioner to somebody else. He would say, go and ask somebody else, right? And the questioner would go and ask, for example, Abdullah ibn Umar or Ali radiallahu anhu sometimes. And then this is how they would tell somebody else to answer the question. Then we got very famous quotes from even Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayh, where sometimes a questioner would come to him from very far away, and who would wait for him, wait for him, and have traveled all this distance as well. And despite that, he would ask the question, and Imam Malik would say, I don't know. And then the person would say, what do you mean you don't know? Like, I've come all this way, traveled to you, I've been sent to you. He said, well, I don't know the answer. So like that. So then the questioner would have to go back, right? But Imam Malik would say, I'm not going to give you an answer when I don't know the answer. Like, I'm not going to take on that burden and responsibility. So famously that, they would really, really think, ponder carefully, and until they were very, very sure of the answer, they wouldn't give the answer. Here, sometimes we have, unfortunately, scholars who may not be very sure of the answer, and they still give the answer. They say, I think it's like this. No, you shouldn't be given an answer like that. You have to, if you think something, then you have to go check it first, and then give the answer. So it's very important that a person understands this. So Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, regarding him specifically, that when he would be asked the question, Ibn Wahb mentions that most of the times he would answer saying, Allah adri, saying, I don't know. And obviously he would then have to go and check and contemplate and think. So Ibn Wahb himself mentions that I asked Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi some 30,000 masail. 30,000 masail I asked him, must have been over some time, and to which the majority of them he answered, La adri. He's saying, I don't know. So you can see here, we can draw a conclusion as to the fear and the importance that our scholars, our predecessors, gave to issuing rulings, issuing fatwas regarding, especially in regards to things or regards to rulings of new rulings that come about. It's important for us to understand that, and in essence make sure that the ruling we give, we are very sure about it, and then only to issue the ruling. May Allah Ta'ala grant us the tawfiq. Ameen. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam wa rasulillah. So alhamdulillah, we finished this section, this part of the poem of Ibn Abidin. Firstly, he starts off mentioning that if there is no transmission from our earlier scholars, then what do we do? So there were three, in essence, three stages that we came to. One is where if the later scholars have discussed this ruling and they have come to an agreement, then we go with that. And if they differ regarding it, then we go with what the majority say and what the most learned amongst them say. So that's that second stage. And third stage is if they have no opinion regarding it, so no consensus, no difference of opinion even, then lastly, this is going to be a ruling which they have not mentioned anything regarding, then what do we do? So we obviously, a mujtahid mufti will be able to look into this ruling and come up with something. But if a person hasn't reached that level, then you're going to have to consult those who have got to that level. And generally speaking, that will always be working best if you have a panel of people, a whole group of people, a whole host of people who you consult with, because obviously, practically speaking, you might be thinking down a certain, in this particular ruling, you may be thinking down a certain, thought process, certain track, but you may have missed certain points which somebody else will highlight, and you think, oh yes, I haven't really thought of it like that, or something along these lines. So it's always good to have a group of people, or to prepare something in a practical way. You prepare your answer, your research regarding it, and then to send it off to others to critique, to look at, and to give their feedback. And like that, inshallah, you get to a conclusion, you refine your answer, and that's how a person in a practical way will be able to issue a ruling. If a person is unable to issue a ruling in this manner, doesn't know, can't do the research, then this person is not allowed to issue a ruling. That person will have to get used to, like everyone has to get used to, saying la adri, saying I don't know. So if you don't know, is not embarrassing, is not a matter of being embarrassed about it, is not a shameful thing. A person doesn't need to know everything. We covered so many quotes from different scholars who were very cautious when giving rulings. So this is something that a person must understand, must be cautious. Caution must be exercised in issuing rulings. Understand the position that a person is assuming when issuing rulings. May Allah Ta'ala grant us the tawfiq to issue, if it comes to this kind of a situation. May Allah guide us and grant us the best way. Grant us ikhlas, firstly, very important to do it for the sake of Allah, and grant us guidance towards how to do it in the correct way. Ameen.